Hey everyone, today I'm talking about 14 games that I think would be ideal for stocking fillers. And what I mean by that are that these games have a tiny footprint, so not only is the box small, the actual game itself is pretty small when it's on the table, and also these games are very affordable. So before I get started on these games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get started on the games, and I'm going to rattle through these pretty quickly. So the first two I wanted to mention were these two little games by Oink. We have Dropalta and Rafter 5. So these are two dexterity games that work very differently actually. So Dropalta is probably the silliest of the two and the silliest of the bunch here that I'm going to talk about. This one, you have a handful of items. You're going to reveal a card, and the objective is to try and drop these very particular items and then pick up this ghost figure that's in the center of the table before the other players do. Now all these items are different shapes, so you've got like keys and little like waffles and these little kind of shells and stuff. So they all have a very different texture and feel in your hand, and it's much more difficult than it sounds, and it's actually much more fun than it sounds as well, because normally I don't like games like this, but this one is tremendous fun. The second one is more of a traditional dexterity game. This one, you are kind of building up this rafter by placing these little cardboard strips or these planks. Then you're moving these big chunky meeples around on them. I'm trying not to make these little chests fall, because if you drop a certain amount of chests, then you will lose the game. But this one is probably my favourite of the two, but it is a bit more traditional. It's a bit more delicate to play with, but still a lot of fun and one of the best dexterity games that I have ever played. Moving on then, the rest of these are pretty much just card games. The first one I'm talking about is Hygge. So not only is this one very affordable and cute, it's actually a really solid little set collection game, as you are taking cards from these rows and columns. All these cards have different colours, and some of these cards allow you to bank those cards as points, and it's kind of a race against the clock, as you want to get everything banked before the game ends, because if you don't, then you're going to lose some points. But so easy to play, and it's still a really good game. The next one is a game called Push. Now this is a push your luck style game, as you're playing a little game of blackjack, I suppose, as you're revealing these cards, trying not to get duplicates, and then you can choose to bank them if you don't want to go too far and get, basically bust for the round. And once you bank them, you're going to put them in your kind of central display, but every now and then you're going to be forced to roll this die here, and if you ever roll one of the colours that you've already collected, then you're going to lose all of them, but you can spend an extra turn just securing them for good for your endgame scoring. So it's kind of an efficiency puzzle where you are playing with your luck. Can you keep everything in front of you without banking them, or are you going to spend that extra time to be a bit more cautious? Huge highs and lows in Push. Next one is a recent game that I picked up called Clink. This is like a bluffing style game, as you're trying to avoid taking points. All you're going to do is you're going to have two cards face down. You're going to either choose to keep them for yourself after looking at one of them, or you can pass them off to another player. Now all the points on the cards are worth negative points, so you don't want those at all. But if you ever get a pair, then they actually flip over and they're worth nothing. Additionally, if you get 3 in a row, then you can get some special powers that can mess with the other players. It's a lot of fun, and if you like games like Cockroach Poker, this is a great alternative that I actually think is a lot better. So that is Clink. Another bluffing game, this is probably the purest example of a bluffing game, is Spicy. So in this game, you're going to have a hand of cards, and you're trying to shed those cards as quickly as possible. And you're playing them face down on a pile in turn order. And you basically are trying to play cards in ascending order, but you can claim to play whatever you like, or you can actually play whatever you like and claim it to be something else. So I think there's 3 different suits here. You've got like your chilies, your peppers, and your salt. And again, you're trying to go up through those numbers, getting higher and higher until it eventually laps back on itself. But again, you can claim anything and put it down. But if somebody calls you out and they correctly call you out, then you're going to be forced to take all those cards as or back into your hand, and it's going to cost you a lot more. Sorry, in fact, they get them as victory points. So again, you can either gamble to call someone out. If you're correct, you'll get them as victory points, but if you're incorrect, they'll get them as victory points. Next up we have Fuji Flush, another shedding game. This one's really good at the higher player counts. You probably want at least 4 or 5 people to get the most from this one. But it's another game where, again, you're trying to get rid of cards from your hand by playing these numbered cards. The twist of this one is that you can try and force people to pick cards back up by working with your other opponents to try and rack up the numbers. Because if you have the highest number in front of you by the time it gets back round to you, then you can discard it. But again, if everybody conspires against you and starts building up the same number together, they can force you to pick it back up. Next up, very cute game with vegetable stock. This is like the purest and simplest example of a kind of an economic stocks and shares style game. As you are drafting these vegetable cards, there's going to be one remaining left after everybody has selected a card, and that is going to manipulate this stock market. Eventually, when the value of these different vegetables gets too high, it's going to crash the market and it's going to go right back down to the bottom. And basically, at the end of the game, all your vegetables are going to be scored based on their current market value. It's only 6 turns, so it's lightning fast. And again, it's a great way to dip your toe into the kind of economic style of game. Next up we have Trio. So Trio, a game I've had so much success with. This is a memory style game actually. It's kind of a memory match style game, but kind of formatted in a different way. So in this one you're going to have a hand of cards and you're trying to get trios of cards, so 3 duplicate cards. And you can do that by saying or guessing the highest and lowest cards in people's hands. Once they've played those cards, or once they've showed you those cards, then everybody's of course going to have that information. And if you ever kind of break the chain, so if you guessed an 8 and then you found a 9, then all those cards are going to go back into where they originally were, and then it's going to go to the next player where eventually they're going to start kind of bleeding out that information and finding where all those cards are. Really good example of a memory game. Again, not normally my jam, but Trio works so well. Next up, Coloretto, so an absolute classic little set collection game as you are choosing to either place these chameleons in these columns or choosing to take a column of chameleons for your final scoring. You can try and be a bit greedy and rack up these columns to get more cards, more bang for your buck basically. But the longer you go on, the more likely it is that other players will contaminate these columns with cards that you don't want, because basically you only score for your best 3 sets of chameleons, and anything other than that is going to score negative points. So you've got to be very careful about when to strike when the iron is hot and get the best cards at the best time. Next up, No Thanks, another bona fide classic. This is another kind of points evasion game as you're trying to get the lowest score possible. In this one, you are going to put a card in the center of the table, which is going to show how many points it's worth. Again, points being a bad thing. Everybody is going to have a handful of tokens, and they can either place a token on that card to pass and say, look, I'm not taking it, no thank you, and it will move on to the next player. But eventually this card is going to build up so many tokens where you're going to be kind of tempted to take that pile, because every token is worth a negative point, which is a good thing, and it will of course give you more passing power in the future. And this one, again, an evergreen, is an absolute classic and one of the best filler games ever made. And speaking about classics, 6 Nimmt, another kind of damage mitigation game. So a lot of these have some similarities in the way they work. This one you are avoiding taking cards again. But in this one, you basically are building up these rows by simultaneously revealing cards. And whoever reveals the 6th card in a row, because there's this kind of numerical sequence where you're playing these cards, they're going to be forced to take that row as negative points. Some cards are worth more than others, but it's all about trying to get into the head of your opponent and just slot your card just in the right place to avoid taking any. Next up, I have a newer game with Kabanga, another shedding game. This one, you have 4 different rows of cards consisting of different colours, and all you're going to do is you're going to play a card from your hand onto one of those sides of those numbers, and that is going to give a kind of a parameter of where the other players can discard cards from their own hand. So if, for example, there might be a 7 yellow and a 10 yellow, basically if you have a number between those, as in the 8 and the 9, all the other players can choose to just discard them when it's not even their turn. It's very luck dependent, but it's charming and it's fast and easy to play. That is Kabanga. And the last game I'm talking about today as a stocking stuffer is Ohanami. This one probably the gamiest of all of them in terms of being a bit more restrictive and some of the rules being a little bit more gamified, but it's still super easy to play as you are building up these 3 columns of cards. All these cards score in different ways and they'll all have a unique number. And whenever you draft these cards, you have to place the highest cards higher than the highest card and the lower cards lower than the lowest cards in these columns. And you can never place anything in those gaps. So the more cards you play, your options quickly start to dwindle, and it's all about trying to squeeze every single point out of this game. It's a wonderful design and one of the best filler games to come out in the last 5 years or so. So that's it really, that's just a bunch of stocking stuffers. I thought this might be a useful video to make in case you're just looking for something for, for a loved one who likes board games. You don't want to break the bank, and you can even learn and play these games on the same day as acquiring them without even thinking too much about it. So it's not like you need to go away, do your homework, and then play it. You can learn these games on the spot. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. And for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.